Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Form Check Friday. Now, sorry we missed you last week. Hopefully, everybody's got their form check needs saved up, and we're here for you this week. So, quick housekeeping before we start. If anybody's interested in submitting for Form Check Friday, go ahead and submit your videos to formcheckfriday@gmail.com. We actually have a video that's going to pop up on the screen right now in an annotation that's going to tell you how to submit your video. We do have some guidelines that we recommend so that we can give you the best critique that we can. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to start off with our last submission from last week. And this is Marvin. I saw a lot of really good comments come in. What we do at the end of every episode is we leave one for people to comment on. We left Marvin up last time. So Marvin's been lifting for 2.5 years. He says his elbows flare a lot and he loses control. This is 130 for 3. And like I said, I think there was a lot of really good constructive criticism in the comment section of the last one. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing here is your elbows are starting to flare before we get the touch, if I'm not mistaken. So right there, during the touch, the elbows are flaring, which tells me that we can't see them, but the shoulders are probably coming up a little bit as we get to the chest. So as you come into the touch, I don't want you to come down nice and tight and then loosen, relax, and let the shoulders roll up. I want you to really pin those shoulders down, pull your chest up to the bar, and touch as high up as you can, right? We want to make that range of motion nice and short where we can. I think that once we solve that, we'll end up with more tightness in the upper back, right? A lot of times when the elbows flare too much or they flare a little prematurely, part of what we're seeing there is the looseness or the loosening of the upper back, and the shoulders come out of position and then the elbows come up as well. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things. The next one is going to be locking out short. So I want you to try to lock out a little bit lower. And the only way we're going to be able to do that is if we can pull our shoulder blades into position and keep them down, right? So a lot of times when people lock out, they tend to straighten the elbows and follow through with the shoulders a little bit. You can see how my shoulders actually move there. We really want to keep them pinned back, finish with the elbows, finish with the triceps, and lock out short, as my good friend JP Cauchy always says. Also a great YouTube channel to check out for detailed technique advice. Go see my man JP Cauchy. All right, a bit glitchy there for a sec, but we've got Reece, and I think that video is a little bit trimmed. So I'm gonna open this in a different media player real quick. Yeah, that's better. A little bit better anyways. There we go, cameraman, good work. Okay, so let's see what we can see here. Reece says he's worried about injuring his back deadlifting. This is a 5x5 at 75%, worked out to about 180 kilos. So let's see what we can see here. So I think overall your deadlift looks pretty good. Number one, if you want to get into powerlifting, do not touch and go deadlift, unless it's specifically a touch and go deadlift. But generally speaking, your deadlift, no qualifiers, should be a dead stop on the floor every time. Anytime we're bouncing it like that, we're missing out on part of the range of motion. We're missing out on part of the stimulus and the strengthening of the full range of motion that is necessary to get better at deadlifts. So the biggest thing I'm seeing here is when you pull into position, we don't really have much in the way of back tightness. We're kind of rounded out in the lumbar here, and no, that is not necessarily a mechanic for injury. Anybody who's followed this channel for a period of time knows you're not just going to blow your back out because you are deadlifting or you deadlift wrong or your back is a little bent. That stuff is just not founded. It's not founded in research. What we do find is, generally speaking, when people run into injuries, it's a combination of a wide sort of variety of things, and probably the most relevant of those things for the topic of this discussion is going to be doing a bit too much work, right? So too much weight, too much volume, just doing too much. Now, real quick on the technical, I think that we could widen the stance a little bit. We could get the knees out a little bit, and that way your quads aren't going to be running into your torso, causing this. If you can get your quads and your knees out of the way a little bit, you might be able to get a better back angle, and that may feel a lot better off the floor, right? The other thing we're seeing is we're starting off with really low forward knees, and as soon as we start moving, the hips pop right up behind you. So one of two things: either we need to be more patient and keep the knees forward, or we need to start with a higher hip position so we're not having this like large dynamic sort of swing of the hips when we go to start the lift. Now, the only way we're going to be able to practice the start position and how we're initiating the movement and how we're moving off the floor is if we don't do that. And every time you bounce it off the floor, I don't know, a puppy dies. No, that's terrible. Something bad happens. You get less strong. I don't know. I got nothing. But anyways, don't do touch and go deadlifts. Generally speaking, there's nuanced reasoning and situations for a lot of things. We can go into that some other time, but for the sake of just getting better at deadlifting, you want to get good at positioning off the floor. You want to get good at breaking the bar off the floor, and we're going to miss out on a lot of that other than rep 1. So you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 reps. Only one of them is actually breaking anything off the floor. The rest of these, we're not getting any better at breaking the bar off the floor. That's what I got for you. All right, now we got Jordan. So Jordan's doing some squats. He says his max is 120 kilos. He weighs 66 kilos. Final set of a 3x5 here. He says it's really tough to hit depth and stay balanced. So he says he's got a really narrow grip. He says he's not very broad, and he says he doesn't like keeping his elbows in line with his trunk because it feels looser. So that's one of the things that I would probably, right off the hop, I would get you to try a little bit wider, try to bring your elbows in line with your trunk, but it sounds like you tried that stuff. So let's go a different direction with this. I think one thing that's happening is you're really focusing on staying super upright. And I think at some point, this like little bit of extension here is kind of limiting our ability to achieve a full range of motion. So the biggest cue I would give you here is probably to, when you start your descent, sit back, let that chest fall a little bit, keep this nice and rigid, right? We want to keep our trunk very tight. But if you refer to our squat tutorial video, our sort of definitive guide to the squat, I talk about 2 different styles of bracing. One being sort of posteriorly focused, where we're probably going to have a little bit of extension. The other being anteriorly focused, where we're probably going to have maybe even a little bit of flexion in the low back. I would say for you, Jordan, I would probably get you to try to brace more ribs down. I would get you to try to brace more anteriorly focused. So think about popping your ribs down over top of your abs, and think about pushing your butt back, not worrying about staying super upright, but rather getting into a nice sort of leaned position before you initiate the squat. Because you can see here, we're definitely breaking knees first, right? We want to try to break knees and hips at the same time, or even hips first. But the reason we're feeling stuck here is because number 1, we're running out of ankle flexibility. And number 2, because we're not willing to continue the hips going lower, because that means we're going to fall forward in the chest. So in order to get depth, we're probably going to need to set the chest a little bit more low and set a bit of a less steep torso angle, a bit of a more horizontal torso angle. So embrace the lean, and I would still probably work with that upper back. I think that right now you're really in here and up like this, and you're shrugged up in your shoulders instead of being more open and down in the shoulders. So I think there's probably a lot of work you could do tying that bar into your trunk a little bit more by going wider in the grip, getting your elbows in line, and making sure that your shoulder blades aren't shrugged up. But I'm not going to beat on that. If you've tried that stuff and it doesn't work, then that's fine. But we can definitely do some work with torso angle, bracing, and I think those things are going to help you get a lot better depth. Marcus, doing some bench press here. So 1 year serious lifting, he says he runs into elbow pain and shoulder pain. Let's take a look here. So this set, that is a 10 RPE, right? There's no way we're getting another rep on that set. So like I was saying earlier, a lot of the times when we run into pain in lifting, it's a result of simply doing too much work and not realizing that sometimes getting the best results from powerlifting or strength training is not the same thing as lifting as heavy as possible all the time in training. So I don't know what your overall training looks like, and all I can do is make assumptions based on what I'm seeing here. But we might just be doing too much work, man. You might need to lighten it up, right? We got 315 on the bar. You know, maybe this would have been good for like a couple of triples, right? So there's the third rep, slowed down a little bit, called an 8, rack it, do 2 more sets there. Instead of, okay, we got to get 5 here. Butt comes up off the bench. Butt comes further up off the bench. We're rolling around, absolute grinder to get it back in the rack. So a few other things that I would probably get you to work on is number 1, let's figure out what we're doing with these feet. You can see on this last rep when it gets sketchy, the feet are kind of dancing around. We're not really anchored through the feet. So it doesn't look to me like we're using leg drive very well. So I want you to get your foot solid. I want you to get your foot stuck into the ground so that you can actually push back into your arch. The other thing, you're intentionally lifting your head up off the bench on the way down. Now what that's gonna do is it's gonna collapse your chest. When you bring your head forward, your chest is gonna collapse, which is gonna make your chest fall, which is gonna make your range of motion longer, which is gonna make it a higher chance that your shoulders are gonna come out of position. So generally speaking, I would advise and coach people to try to keep their heads back so that they can keep their chest up and keep everything nice and tight, right? We don't need to have this big sort of like dynamic whole body movement. I think once we get the feet figured out, we get our leg drive more consistent. We're not going to see that butt coming up. Get the head down, keep the chest up, and just do a little bit less, man. Train a little bit less. Get some more volume in, maybe, but don't hit too many of those 10 RPs in training, folks. All right, William doing some deadlifts, working set, 60 kilos, 5x5, just getting back into some powerlifting here. So it looks to me, William, like you are just kind of squatting it up. Right, you're setting your hips maybe too low and starting a little bit too upright. See, especially on that rep. The weight's light enough that you can kind of get away with it right now, right? But what I would do is I would bring these knees back, bring that hip up, and back position actually looks pretty okay. But get to the point where you're feeling a little bit of tension in your hamstrings and your glutes and your quads and your lats before you start, right? We want to feel lots of tension before we start the deadlift. We don't just want to kind of sit down and then push. We want to pull ourselves down and back, right? Down and back to get a lot of tension in that posterior chain to the point where, you know, with a lighter weight, it should almost float before you start. So you look at the hip height that you set it down to. It's a little bit different. We're very much on the toes for a lot of this. And I think we need to get a little bit more on the heels, get a little bit more sort of flat-footed. And as the bar starts to slow down there, I want you to think about just squeezing your butt muscles. Right now, I think as it starts to slow down, you're really thinking about pulling back. Just think about squeezing your butt. Use those glutes, man. Hip extension. Keep this tight. Don't try to like make the pull happen with your trunk because the power is going to come from them glutes. Right? And right now you're kind of throwing the knees underneath. You got to learn to use those hips and hamstrings a little bit more. But I think you're off to a good start. A few quick tips and that may go a long ways for you. All right, we got George up next doing some squats. He says he's been training for over a year, put 40 pounds on. Not sure if he means on his body or on his squat, but he says he struggles with the squat. So he's tried low bar and high bar. He's a really tall person. He says his back gives out before his legs and just wants some critique here. So we're going to leave this to play through one more time. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Leave some comments, some constructive criticism for our boy George in the comments section below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. Tune in next week for our Form Check Friday. Make sure to catch our live streams at twitch.tv/Calgary Barbell every Friday at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. We'll see everybody in the next one. Peace.